Fanling go háirte ag a láfríse de fan dunch post an onadlais mór le ránacht ag Lord Dr. Death. Agus ag a fiche cúig héis a híneag, chuirt a brú háirte sin nacht, net a héitir Aster Lord Survivor. Ach in is tíirech, si siar agus banigi salt as litir rá ón dar cogad damda.
Nuair a bhíonn sé dorachas sníche agus i do laigh a leabal a cuinúir, céir a hála, céir tá rótamach, bhí rud amháin a chuine beha sin an bheim. Bhí íomhá ag isteanach leigem, pictiúr go Eileen, isteanach leigem, agus sinné an rud a chuine a bhisneach, a chuine a chrí láidir, bhí barú leige go dúcach deireadh leis seo, agus an deireadh bheith leis a scéal seo, go mbeadh sé héin agus ise le chéile ríist.
My own darling Frank, what I have dreaded all these months has now come to pass. Could you glum a ré no a yenu? Níl na facalugum la henche dat kin fian a tamachri is swinchwart.
This morning I burned all your letters, and you know what a heartbreak that was to me. Da had litraha, la ahan akal a vi chaluach war sin dúsa. Ca gorir me, agus could you harla has du, sin rud na wallas ago. A thes agum seo, go me ma peliwart go lua. Níl gheithar a dón a chur is bacarim, ta ma ní smó an réil a tanis na mar a víriau.
It's a love story that survived the most incredibly difficult conditions. Frank Murray was a Catholic nationalist doctor who joined the British Army because it was the right thing to do.
This is about courage, it's about fortitude, it's about love, it's about faith. And it says to us in this war-torn world that love and kindness, these are the things that make our world a better place.
Frank Murray, my father, he came from an interesting family. His father and his uncle bought a spirit grocer's shop at 155 Old Park Road. So Dad had 5 sisters and 2 brothers. 4 of his sisters became nuns. And then he went to the Jaffa School, this is probably one of the first interdenominational schools in Ulster. And his father said, well, you can either work in the shop or you can be a policeman. I think because maybe he was quite tall. But Dad became a doctor. Mum was born in a place called Glenalina Terrace, which was on the Falls Road opposite the city cemetery. 3 sisters, 3 brothers. 2 of her sisters became nuns, but grew up in this household which was dominated by Gaelic culture, perhaps even more so than Dad's family.
Casú a cheala muid a cheadúar, an lí jig fi an lí ag céalaí a galaiste bhríide ar an na farste. Nar a lug masúlarí trasna an chambre plódige. Vís a gom leithra bon, gur bhí seo an cailín dúsa.
He described her as this beautiful young woman in a floral dress. And my mother told us that she did not feel very special. He walked up to her and in Gaelic asked her to dance. And then they danced every night. Every night.
When they were at Queen's University together, Dad studying medicine and Mum geography, Dad would wait down at Shaftesbury Square as Mum walked into town. And depending on whether she walked down the Dublin Road or Great Victoria Street, he'd wait at the bottom of one of those before she got the bus back to the Springfield Road where she lived.
Apparently he failed first year, and he attributes that to him mooning about some girl, so I assume that was my mother.
Gré simply, Íde lahavíon gan fág gan chartíocht ar charbi, ba léir gur machar ogla ari le mohaid éireachtaí san ulscoil. A de réir cheile, chuimmuid sear mala hain.
Around about 1937, his dad was qualifying from Queen's. Too worried it was just maybe too much too soon. She broke it all off. Meanwhile, after he qualified, he got into a practice in Birmingham and worked really hard for 2 years.
This morning, the British ambassador in Berlin handed the German government a final note stating that unless we heard from them by 11 o'clock, that they were prepared at once to withdraw their troops from Poland, a state of war would exist between us.
When the war started and joined the Medical Corps on the 2nd of December 1939.
Varshal muj gach majin y grwcym. Le yn cafchin lo, jai genda animneha gach majin. Chon na Francie, go Gibraltar, chon yn Venerer, go Jean Inge, and shin hanig animal Lieutenant Murray in Yeser and Lista, go Jean Inge, mor hugger go hieshel in the chluas.
There was many Irish people who were more than willing to stand up and fight fascism. So it wasn't as much as they're going off to fight for the King Emperor, they're going off to fight the Nazis.
Having read all the letters, one was about a patient he had in Birmingham, Johannes Messner, who was a refugee from Austria, a theologian who'd actually worked with Dollfuss, who was the Chancellor of Austria before he was assassinated by Hitler. Dad had a particular affection for this man, Johannes Messner, and he said, for that man, I would fight all the Nazis in the world.
Northern Ireland stepped up with thousands of recruits very early on. It's harder to get a figure for the Irish Republic, but it's something like about 70,000 men and women volunteered for the Allied forces, mostly the British Army, including something like about 4,500 members of the Irish Defence Force.
Bhí fíor wachtanas sa gantar seo, ní raibh postana ann. Mar sin bhí seans acu, go mbeadh job a cinnte acu, rá meanaman ghistáil siad in arm na Breataine, fór siad éadach an ghracin amach, bhí siad réití trénailte agus bhí siad brodú leis. Nuair a tháinig an dara cogad domhanda, bhí cuid acu a gcéire saidúireacht thar lear. Tugu adventurous ar cuideacham, bhí siad ag gcéir an síl eile ceá.
Back in Omagh, teaching in the Loreto Convent, our mum always knew that Dad loved her. Dad sent a Christmas card in 1940.
My mother was, by all accounts, quite popular. At some stage, she sort of started to regret the young man that she'd sent packing.
There was nothing in that card apart from that. And then Mum wrote quite a long letter back. And then that was it. Dad just wrote reams back to her. For him, it was like a dream come true that this beautiful young woman should actually now love him back. And then Dad's proposal of marriage.
I am 6.5 inches tall, 12 stone 10 pounds in weight, agus daichid orla har chimpel mo chliavra, agus gana triacha orla chimpel mo chin, tama daraha agus doyle, Mus mian la ban auger bi, berlum gur as edini, agus o cain mor chlunuari. Skriw hugum le sulis go bossermudge, dan sholu huas.
Nor doine, nor hermid an kecht mar sin ar dine ella, ben an freiger a rashagin again couple second. So to sé jacker doine is in a hiskent. Har franken kecht, vi fannacht fa couple mi go an liter egg Eileen, agus an sin nor vi an freigra á skrif ag Eileen, vi frank fannacht couple mi ella.
Arún mo chilev, Aniu an le is suel ki riaw mo heel. Hartar uare chligachan for my helegram wood, agus canaku a fogurch gebosse to ma. A gregal, shunnen fragrer a fanartar la blianta fadde. Nes stor. Agus much galtal in the hele, kai mu tashach the planen dan seal at ha maroon.
Tash getchemini a hasharam van einishin ugunne. Be ken an donigum an eine. Kennis go rowny tessi. Karama kabla hugged a luche is a hukashi. Ni wanhi ma duhi le na ihe is dar.
My father sent my mother £100 to buy a ring. So my mother went with her sister, my Auntie Jo, down to Dublin, and they together picked out a ring. The ring actually didn't cost as much as £100, so presumably she used the rest for her bottom drawer.
A new is dar for my grim couple of rid than Tarakan Yekter. Nivo lehen id simugum a shop of fashion is a ta ogum sa shop of crua ari.
Joe Dunn was my grandfather. He was born in Dublin in 1907. At the age of 14, joined the ranks at Guinness. 1932, set sail to Singapore. Life in Singapore was a merry-go-round of social events, dances at raffles, any excuse for a party.
Nuair a léonn tú Rudyard Kipling, Jofa tú léargus anwa yn síl a bhí acab. Agus ní bheith an doctor róg an óch edi géileáil leis na saidiúí bheith pártí acab cóisiir, bhí aon duine a bhí go mórmhór an cór marcar de cavalry, bheith siad sin ag imirt polo, bheith siad ag imirt cortaí, go mórmhór bridge. Bhí sé sin ancadtí an táin, agus snooker. Agus is all is as a honig snooker.
He ma sísa go dinnear an nach trasna ó bhuair, agus ní raibh sé ebalta an méid a bhí gilstin ar a cheilt. Go tobann, d'arc sé arm agus dúirt. Níl má ebalta chur suas leis fásta, chur má ceiste, cuid a bhí chur isteair, agus dúirt sé. An síl seo, níl a ré le déanún seo a gáil a motha gáil.
These cruel, wanton, indiscriminate bombings of London are, of course, a part of Hitler's invasion plan. This monstrous product of former wrongs and shame has now resolved to try to break our famous island race.
The second largest air raid per size of the population in the United Kingdom was, after London, was Belfast, and Belfast was hammered. They attacked and destroyed heavily populated urban areas, and for that reason, casualties in Belfast were the second highest in the whole of the United Kingdom.
Níl bunchir bíogam sa le cogúir bíon seo am léa, agus détain i bheith gobar sa bhála. Ní chreite chuide go deachar agus a teise a bheith bhád a géine agus na rudaí sin ag tarlú sa bhála. Is mé bhí gornaí na deochú rudar bí artsa ná ar do witcher. Níl má ebalta buam ag tarlann seir bhil farste ag marú na gétaí a hawlú. Daoine na ró ebalta a tanna chasint.
The Home Secretary, John McDermott, phoned De Valera, and he sent the fire engines. Every available fire engine from Dublin and the coast were sent to Belfast. So the whole island pulled together for this. The other remarkable thing was that recruiting from both Northern Ireland and the Irish Republic went up during that period, and also industry went up in terms of the production of everything from aircraft to ships to food, which was vital, of course, to the Great Britain mainland as well. So it was almost that those attacks woke Ireland up.
A Eileen a star, and digging to mo chais, agus me geri tridge in nedan cruelahas agus brúdulach de motion. Corincha mirima, nor a smuichum go jocala etchalari garmona achan na guard ar grieta sa wala a waru.
In one small extractor to Eileen, which was that he felt it would do the Catholic cause in the north no harm if he did his bit.
For Singapore, our £20 million base is one of the strongest vetoes on Japanese aggression. Here already, Ack gunners are in action.
The severity of the oncoming situation was often dismissed by people. They felt Singapore was impregnable. There is no way it could be taken.
Bhí muid faoi ansaí ag na buamaí agus ag na maisíní gánaí fáil uaireanta a chluigear maidín. Ní óglar bíarm, ní an maid dearmar dart le linnean ruharsan. Bhí da factar bug agus da glí grú ag buailte le mo chrí agus hanig mas lein.
For in those tragic early months of 1942, when we sustained defeat after defeat at the hands of our common enemy,
I cheap me a léamh síl Frank ná gur banú get as aram hasna agus na Saidúrí. Agus cuid go na Saidúrí an ó hóg le 60 nó 70 agus viidir in ngéfin an chéad gette banú asab ná get stechan seo go sicólaíoch.
For that Holocaust to arrive on the sunny beaches and cocktail bars of Singapore and Johor Straits was inconceivable. Inconceivable, and it's a bit like trying to imagine sitting in the Temple Bar today, enjoying a pint, and 10 or 12 Vikings walking through the door. That's the equivalent.
as we look heavy-hearted at this collapse of the fortress that we thought impregnable, what is there to see? There is a warning beacon, which is a light shining to guide us in a dark future.
Well, Singapore came at a critical juncture in the war. It was a massive blow for morale across the empire, but particularly back home in the United Kingdom, because it looked like it was the precursor to total defeat across the board.
Joe Dunn, my grandfather, described in his diary scenes of the mounds of weapons that were piled up on the docks as people came forward to surrender.
What no one foresaw, though, was that when they did surrender, that they would be murdered in such large numbers. And I think if they knew that, perhaps they'd have fought on. The wounded were murdered in hospital, the medical staff were murdered, nurses were raped and murdered. Remembering in the Code of Bushido that this was their perfect right to do so, that these people were no longer combatants, they were in the way.
Rinch mi na hain, nar a hannig man cogu se teart. Hílma go deachún tam, go nima hain cracailte. Nar na mósagam, ro tú bio na maru, mai na go halk, a gontarch na slán sawailte. Hwela stad, few seaartainne in een ortu le a nálag, chraid ma kentje gro ma galas ma vior.
Dad had no idea what was going to happen to him. Dad did not want the Japanese reading Mum's letters. Burning her letters was really painful for him.
Níor ógla ar Maria, rinn ma magúalgus a gcónaí, go minic faoi ionsaí na sligean agus buama lonéir, ar bhalla an teart. Heig man na roch an buas an endú.
Nuair a smaoineann muid faoin stad insne atá ag Frank agus Eileen, an rud a suntasí faoi ná go an méid sin éigeanteacht atá an ag an am sin. So tá Frank agus Eileen ag fannacht, níle is acu céch a fada sa bheith Frank ag fannacht, nó níle acu fiú a mai sé teacht slán. So tá brú allmhór ag baint leis an éigeanteacht sin, agus tuigeann muid go gcuireann sé sin isteach go mór ar mar láinte an duine.
Mo seo an leitsear dhearna a jóstú wamsa. Caithma insidid, gur na míon na seo a chaithmuid goideach de chéile ar an tréimhse ba honna agus ba chuailcí agus ba bhanaiche riamh am chéal.
The first thing that the Japanese general did 2 days after taking Singapore was he lined up the entire garrison in parade order, and he drove past them for the benefit of the cameras in a British staff car. And the route was lined with British, Australian and Indian soldiers to demonstrate to the audience back home of the total extent of the Japanese victory.
The Frank agus a chomrádaithe an síl bhí acab míle na nefiga agus daoine a freistal orm agus sa tróna gimmert polo nó snooker míle na nefiga sa tróna bhí sé sin áirithe ó bhain go bár bhí an tefigach a bhí geannas orm ba Seapánach é.
What you have to remember is that within the Japanese system, the code of the samurai, people who had surrendered in war had no value or rights whatsoever. They were completely irrelevant. And so the fact that they allowed them to live was seen as, in some cases, very generous, other cases a blunder. But very quickly they realized that they might be useful as slave labor to build things. But they deeply resented feeding these people. They deeply resented looking after them, and any act of resistance or any act of trying to recover any dignity was seen as insolence and an insult to what they thought was the generosity they were extending towards them to even allow them to live.
Ní raibh aon caithfh aimsire ag a gcuid is mó acab. Bhí teas uasachán. Bhí míltógaí géarán, mosquitoes. Bhí droch bheithe an. Bhí droch éadach. Ní raibh an téadach golánta, ní raibh sé sin acab níos mó.
For our mum, it must have been a lonely time. She had a lot of support from the family, but it was the great unknown. When our dad would be coming back, was he still alive? Great delay in the letters.
I think she got the first official letter in September 1942, so we're talking 7 months afterwards. But of course, the War Office, once they knew that he was captured, they wouldn't necessarily know where he was, but at least there was a mechanism for contacting him. And I think likewise Dad was able to send letters to her.
Hanne ma adam a múnu, a giche, a calu, agus ní rósagum cadé a bhí a dhéanúgum. Bhí ma cótóca las muinte fut. Ní war ma solas bí as an arnaí. Ahan le agus a ghrian a géri, híl ma na jocin fríd.
Nor léon muid na litreacha seo fecin muid rudí amháineann le Frank agus Eileen an ró lárnach a bhí ag an creideamh a bhí acu.
Buías de dhéagóil de chláintegad agus ggóil tú sonna a ghra. Bíwas agad ggóil ma go thomlan an ngrálat agus gach le ó Jimmy tú. Bitir go leanaí an cogu a ré ar fón na mlíonta ach níartha seama be ma leat go John na neor.
So they were transported to Japan. On May 1943, this ship called the Wales Maru had almost 1,000 POWs on board. There were 600 British, 300 Australian, and I think about 50 American.
Bhí turas a bheith cúpla seachtain acu, beidir 3 seachtain i taistil go dtí an Teapán, agus bhí siad a lig I mollag na linge.
But the prisoners who were sleeping or trying to sleep directly underneath the deck were the hottest because the deck was metal. Their sweat was dripping down onto the prisoners below. And they were allowed out on deck maybe once a day to basically relieve themselves over the side of the ship.
Joe down my grandfather. He was one of about 200, he reckoned, in that hold. Completely cheek by jowl on top of each other. They were hungry, they were thirsty, they were exhausted, they were shell-shocked. You know, as the rain came, The holds were closed, so they were completely in the dark in this air that he described you could cut with a knife.
Níor mór an bíacu, níor mór an iscacu, agus hiag Frank gur a bhfuil mór ag bant leis go mbeadh galar in an scapa go forlahan is bás mar sin. So hiag sé an ról a bhí ag na cuilóga ag scapa galar mar sin, agus bhí chef nó clifa aige go mbeadh siad an na cuilóga a bharú. Bhí rud a cinnt le déanamh ag na fear bhí comórtas ar siúl.
My grandfather, Joe, observes in his diary, Major Murray told us for every 10 dead flies, 1 cigarette would be awarded. The men got busy with gusto, fly hunting, and my grandfather thought that this was great.
Also, Dad was reading Romeo and Juliet, he was reading The Merchant of Venice on this ship, and he read to the men A Midsummer Night's Dream. So he had his own way of just trying to survive.
Every single man who stepped onto that ship from the docks of Singapore made it to Japan alive, which was incredibly rare for health ships.
So then they got to Mururan. So the prisoners were working in a steel foundry. Being a GP in Birmingham doesn't prepare you for the sort of horrors of a Japanese POW camp.
I gá pinos bonúsacha in úsáid ag saidúirina seapáine an dacha seo. Iver a héin bhí cíapa fisiciúil ach go háir thugtaí bintú úsáid doran dúnta agus an sin an rud eile fíorthachtaach ná an úsáid a rinne na saidúirí seapánacha as na saláthair bíg chun pinosachar na prisúnathe.
Bhí sé iontach deacair le High Frank fear ránú chun dul ag obair chuile lá. Bhí smaoinemh sláinte na fear agus in ag am céine gur an brú sin orthú go mbeadh daoine ag obair chuile lá. Bhí teanasáid an dárad le High Frank an dúlgus a bhí mar ghochtúir agus an ról a bhí ige mar ceannaire sa champa freisin.
And it was the role of the medical officer particularly, not as much to treat illness, but to create living conditions and sanitary conditions such that the men had the opportunity and the potential to survive their captivity.
And in one of his letters he says, the only medicine I have is a can of Epsom salts for diarrhea, a few dressings and many prayers.
And for someone to persuade all those young men, and they were young men, to choose the hard road of living and existing in the horror that it was, as opposed to succumbing to the sweet sleep of death, speaks of someone who could genuinely touch their souls.
Cámuid cibne gur ifigach profisiúnta dochtúr a bhí Frank. Ní bhfuair sé an tréintheáil in Sandhurst ná na coláistí míleata. Agus is dóigh nach bhfuair sé aon tréintheáil an ceanchaí a bheith i do príosúnach catha. Agus tá tréintheáil a testáil ón rud sin. Agus fáin efigí profisiúnta agus saidiúirí tréintheáil ar na rudíise.
Because they didn't know how long that captivity would be, they had to start from nothing. And so everything from protection from the elements through to build buildings, through to sanitation, through to making sure that food was properly cooked and distributed were their only priorities. Actually looking after the ill people was almost secondary to that, because the assumption and the reality, I'm afraid to say, is that if you did become ill, you were going to die.
Bhí cuid go na saidiúirí a pleanáil éaló. Ní raibh aon seans éalaithe ó aon phríosún catha san áis. Mórmór sa bhuiine seapánaí. Béidh sibh anseo go mbeidh sé thart, nó go bhfuil sibh bás. Meanman an taidiúire a cuinú ó lá go lá, grím le níthe, droch bheithe, droch chláinte. Níor siad a fáil litreachaí ach an isise sa ríist.
And it must have been so difficult for the men not to lose heart completely, especially the younger men that perhaps had a girlfriend, and then the girlfriend stopped writing.
Well, hig rialtas America ag an am sin an loch foiile a bheith baint le na litreacha seo go dtí na daoine a bhís na campi géiven. In áitina mar sin ní mór an takeíocht an na daoine eile agus bhí loch foiile a baint le an nasc sin idir tú hain agus an teilech, de haisce, de cháirde sa bhaile agus bhí an rialtas i tuairt spreige de réine na litreacha sin a scríomh. Well, thuaí na fear óga ar gúil go minic na campi seo ceapan muid inis os é nach raibh na nascanna sin arthú, agus sin arás go dtí an táhacht a bhí baint le na litreacha.
Bín sé geiste go man erid sin na scríomh thugad ahan le mustáir. A tá na jabs mí bhúnte sin na choristeachar mo chuid scríbhnearachta. Mar sin héin, níl siad ebalta stop a chuirla sin na go ré atá agam dit. Níl duinear bíar an dón ebalta sin íanú.
Tá cuid bhá areolalas faoi na deacreachtaí a bhíonn ag daoine le mearthlánte sna campi sin. Tá cuid bhá scríofa ag scríomhnóirí mór le rá go háirithe faoi na campi sa Eorp agus tá smaoine bhanis faoi Primo Levi agus Viktor Frankl a méidir bhí scríomh acu. An tuiscint sa bhí anna an am nach cheap daoine go mbeadh fear óga a bhí aclaí agus téagaire go mbeadh siad an teacht sláán an na campi sin ach ní sin mar bhí sé thorbe agus thuig na scríomhnóirí seo ná bhainte sin le rudaí fisiciúil le chorbe ach rud a bháin le seocólaíocht an duine ag an am. An rud is tábhachtaí dar le na scríomhdóir sin ná go mbeadh misneach agus dóchas ag an duine.
A few months in, my grandfather, he was put on gardening duty. It was forbidden to help themselves. There were random checks. He was chosen one day and he was discovered to have potatoes squirreled away. For everyone that he had attempted to smuggle in, he got a rifle butt in the head. They then shaved his head in the shape of the Union Jack as the lumps began to swell. So I can only imagine the sight that he made the following day, heading out to tend the potatoes. On his return, they laughed at him. They took one look at him and they just said, "Today you know potatoes." And he nodded and went into the camp gates with even more potatoes smuggled on his person than he'd attempted to bring in the day before.
Cuirtar an ceist go minic cén fá gur cha Saidúrí na Seapáine leis na presúnathe agus cén fá gráidir có brúdúlach sin le ling an cogaigh. Is cuoin an freigra siimplí a bhí ag J.G. Ballard. Dúirt sé nach raibh an meas céanna ag cultúr na Seapáine ar an saol ar dhéanamh an duine déine. Agus bé sin an rud banúsach an ácording in cultúr a bhí bunathe ar den glán, ar den greideamh, agus ar naidas dá cuasain béaldorais agus ach go háirithe dá cuasaní bána.
Seans na bheice má tusa nó má bháile a chuíthe ríist í Hawaii agus banach J. Artsailling.
Ba chuma leis cára sé. Bhí sé scoite amach ón túfás a bhí hartaid agus na litreachaí agus a rud a bhí sé an géile na scríomh sé. Bhí sé gomarsáid lethe ar feadh ama a leog. Bhí sé gant lethe agus bhí sí an aice leis agus is sí a chunne beá.
She wasn't getting any younger. No idea when the war was going to end, and no idea what state Dad would be in if and when he actually came home.
You know, by the time it was 1944, she must have just been, distraught, absolutely distraught. A lot of her friends and family were starting to pity her, that, she's got this young man and, she doesn't know if he's ever going to come back again, and, She's put all her hopes in that he'll come back and they'll be happy ever after, but time was slipping away.
And I know my mother wanted children. Like, she didn't just have children because that's what you did. She really wanted to have children.
Istoi go gapan would gur ben dinner a wine gur an farsha grosha hologer sin hege nie vi bertakan agus vi si nenach leis agus vi si tív leis agus is se gampe geven agus gojiger leme nrudi skrif se vi sagam goroshi in nenach leis. Vi si nís gyrra ho na ein din elle sna campi gefin. A gaistach an rode, sinni captain se.
Soldiers, sailors, and airmen of the Allied Expeditionary Force, the eyes of the world are upon you.
Covered by watchful air fighters, the American units left their various harbors in southeastern England to meet the British units at a rendezvous off the Isle of Wight.
Ihe nie, hoi ma Hansen shamre, agus Ridgeman Radio. Thursday, June 8th, and Darna Yeri must be a terrific affair.
Along the Normandy beaches, many were hit and died, but our troops landed and held on.
And Darla Yeg da Viebran, ni Jeg da Hitsa Kuig, ta Hanover 11 na Sassenach. Triula Jeg da Viebran, Hannigan Skiel Alkushtia, Gore Roosevelt Bless. Tachtula Jeg da Viebran. Ta should 4 kilometer o Berlin inish. Carolas 4 da Viebran. Ta the Soviets in Berlin inish. Agus ta the Sassenly a Hamburg.
We linked up with the Ruskies at the Elbe River. Hung around for a couple of days with a Tommy gun, and he taught me Tovarish. That means comrade. Had a million laughs.
And he had laid a Vina Beltanya. Ta na garage buelche fa Yeru. Triule da Vina Beltanya. For Hitler agus Mussolini Boesinye.
Savage hand-to-hand struggles were fought for possession of a fly speck on the map. But these fly specks dominated hundreds of thousands of square miles of ocean.
Vi forsi verika a glaka shelef na hilan. Greri kele pisa fis agus fisha ni Rocheska Guadalcanal, vi Solomon Islands fisha an jacket Iwo Jima. Agus vachas acob gora ahro an atmosphere na prísún. Agus na hilan ra na prísúni. Danien hi rúchar na háteach sin béide gomach réiteach ag arm na Seapáine a bhaib sin dar lo iad a liug a chacha a chur chumbáis.
Naturally, the Japanese would recognize that large numbers of foreigners on their soil could hamper the defense of the island. And given that they didn't want them in the first place, prisoners were already being murdered in overseas destinations where they couldn't evacuate them back to the Japanese mainland. They wouldn't waste transport on that. They were simply murdered. The order had been signed in Tokyo to murder the prisoners. So the order had been given. They just didn't get time to carry it out.
My father asked each prisoner to set aside some food for an escape attempt. It would probably be futile, but rather than stay in the camp and just be massacred, they should try and escape.
An Mort, Mohim a Mainer, agus tá má bhuaigne a de dhé Frank. Cin jowl a bhí Adam gur léma do chuid litratha is mé an éisle brí. Chínma an irid sin gur chiilma go mrisead seamach rí. Déisma le nuacht BBC agus le Radio Éireann. Capol tú a stormach rí ó a chéarna tan brú wafasa. Da mó seans began go bhuiad má cablúid agus gan a focail a bhain. Bhí á. Sinna méide tá da dhíharm. Tá má genú mi dhíhil agus a gí go mé meisna agam. Ach, tá se cruai.
Séhol a déag da bhíol ní déag da hit sa cúig. Bhí brynla jogam goró jeru le hanrod agus goró ma ar ma bhalla a bhála hagad.
The energy that generates the heat of the sun and operates the solar system comes under the will of humankind.
Tá meach arm Veracá. Ansa dhéana mór hir na Seapáine agus dá seasach arm na Seapáine an óid. Agus go dosach an treid ó áiteháin go áiteile bhí fatsis ar bheith go leor cáilte a bhechail go leon mari agus bheith na séidiúí a bhí I néomhan bheith sí sin mari freisin. As sin a leog, tháinig an technoliaach nua seo an búma mó.
A lone B-29 dropped a single atomic bomb on the munition city of Hiroshima. Smoke rose 50,000 feet as an explosion equal to 20,000 tons of TNT brought the greatest man-made disaster in the history of the world. The greatest of all wars came to an end. The people of the world relieved their tired nerves in a wild burst of celebration.
Bhí sa go Seapáin ag go buinte sin gur se thart. Ní étaí cuacht agus olchuacht agus saibhras Veracá a scris. Agus nuair a hagach sé go dtí an pointe bachan bua ag Veracá agus a gúid cógólaithe.
My grandfather witnessed the swords being handed over by the Japanese to Dr. Frank Murray. He relived that moment, February 1942, where he handed over his weapon. I think a great moment for him to see the tables turned.
Japanese officers must surrender their swords in double-quick time. British occupying troops enjoy the ceremony.
Is féidir linn an testament a léamh seo rud a scríomh na daoine bhí sa campa le Frank nar bhí sé fágáil agus heasta buchas a gháil le Frank as a méid a bhí déanta aige. Many of us would not be alive at this happy moment but for your care. You have been an inspiration to everyone and a source of spiritual refreshment and courage. We men of the Royal Navy, British Army, RAF, Mercantile Marine and American Army want you to know our feelings of profound gratitude, respect and affection for you.
Men fóver ní déag da hit sa cúig. Be ma ima fréachan na masc na bécag a fág tréimhse a teici tú mar a heigean na gcónaí. Bhí tusa a da réalt ála seo go mar riamh agus bé I chríche.
A storm a chrí. Faca man ómai chréin a lehinné a hín de saharn siúgan. Rahama go láharna le casta lab. Ní féidir le a chreidral gwil an fanart fada hart agus gur gear go mémid le chiile. Agus ní scatar go jomaid. Tá gra móragam duid a gcónaí. Tá súl le díagam gur a fes a bhís a grásin. Agus ná licim a duid a bheith brona a ríis go bra. Banart Jared, God bless you and bring you safely on the last lap of your round-the-world trip to me. Ever your own loving Aileen.
When I had disembarked, we ran with arms outstretched and cried with joy in that wonderful embrace. At last I was home. And here in my arms was the one person who made my homecoming possible. It was Eileen's love, her faith and prayers, her steadfastness that gave me hope in my direst moments as a POW.
And that was the first time they'd kissed. That's the first time they probably had any physical contact whatsoever. Because remember, it wasn't just the war years. Dad basically had not seen her since probably 1937. And now this is the woman he was going to marry.
4th of February 1946, Dad came back November 45, married in St Bridget's Church in Derryvolga Avenue. Yeah, she'd got her man. It had taken 10 years, and God must have got so fed up being asked to facilitate the wedding. Mum believed, as Dad did, they both believed in God and Christ's love that would get them through.
Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. You will comfort me. You are with me. You will comfort me.
Basically, he was starting from scratch, and my father set up a practice above his father's spirit grocer store. If a customer would come into the shop, complain about some ailment or other, my grandfather would say, well, why don't you pop upstairs and see my son?
Achar Frank, Bhíonn teapa ag éaspagáil ó ar golas teasa teapa agus dúir session mamma agus the daily eile hartar nuair a bhí Frank chur suas clinic ar tús an sin in dhéag dá hacht an scéal a bhí an ar scarabí nuair a bhí mis a réile hacht amach hanig Frank agus thug sé amach le so sin an scéal agus sin an tús so bhí aithne go mar ó bhí me ó hanig mar a tíl go dtíre.
He refused to take on any private patients because he believed that everyone should be treated the same. But he was always a champion of the underdog and the downtrodden.
Reverend National Health Service, ní ruidir bí sír, big an dífa díl le gola ag an Ireland mar sin. Agus ní ruin tarigh an acu. Oh, Dr. Murray, I don't think I can afford that. So, that's all right. Jimmy ran Sir Hugh agus an sin nuair a bhí Sir Hugh amachchas an teach, dúirt sin amach go raibh airgid fáig a taobh hir den clog ar an cláirsear. Dunne éintach mai a bhí an ar an nó agus sin na cimhne a taigh na daoine in sa counter ar Dr. Murray. Kyle Moore a bhí an ar a daig Clan Murray agus Dr. Murray agus a bhean, so Jimmy siad go caiisle nua.
They had a bungalow there which they used as a holiday home. And of course it was right next to the golf course. Mum loved her golf. And Dad could see her coming up the 18th fairway from the kitchen window, and he would get the food on ready for her when she came home. She knew Dad was dying, and she said to me, I want you to do something for me. Could you hold his hand and give him 3 little squeezes? I love you. Not what you get, but what you give. Not what you say, but how you live. Giving the world the love it needs. Living the life of noble deeds.
We would do well in the modern world to look for the things that motivated people like Frank Murray, so that if we need those things that we can fall back on them. We can't be Frank Murrays, but if we understood some of their motivations, then it might come in very useful for us in the future.
I knew the Queen Mother was interested in the welfare of ex-servicemen, so I wrote to her, and would it be possible for her to present the Dad's MBE to Mum? And within a few weeks I got a response, would it be possible for Mum to go to Clarence House? She was wonderful, she took a genuine interest in Mum. She said she'd been to Downpatrick, she went to the races at Downpatrick, and she said, and you know what, my horse won.
He brought us up as the most incredible example of what a good human being looks like. But he wasn't a pushover, and he would wage war against bullies. And he loved the poor, and he loved his patients.
Ní dóil am grain doubt istína agne ag áma be gudiochach sé slán. Cé go sé tí, cé go sé níos le brí scatí. Gudiochach sé slán agus go meach siad le chéad éis. Ní rá éon gá leis go ninseach sé an scéilte. Mar bhí go le chéile, is this a gampa gébin.